Senator Patterson, you have the call again.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to quickly follow up the line of questioning from Senator Shoebridge on one issue before moving on to another topic. Mr Hansford, I think I heard you say in response to Senator Shoebridge that the reason why the government had to take action under the PSPF on those specific apps is that they represented a quote-unquote extreme risk. Did I hear you right?
Yes, Senator.
So Kaspersky and DeepSeek represent an extreme risk, and I assume, flowing on from that, you regard TikTok as an extreme risk as well?
Yes, Senator.
Given that, has the government used the powers available to it under the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act to also require critical infrastructure operators to remove those pieces of software?
No, Senator, but in issuing the direction, when the Secretary issued the direction, both on DeepSeek and on Kaspersky, we took a number of actions to write to all critical infrastructure in the country, outlining the risks and encouraging them to also take similar action. And we have had reports that a lot of critical infrastructure have taken the action, particularly as it relates to DeepSeek. We've also done that with state and territory governments.
Did you do the same for TikTok?
It wasn't in the department at the time,
No, that's fair.
But I do recall having discussions with infrastructure owners and operators back in 2023. Yes.
Do you think critical infrastructure owners would understand that TikTok represents an extreme cybersecurity risk?
I think that when you look at vendor risk, actually a lot of people don't understand particularly the foreign ownership, control and influence, and there is a role for the government, which is why this month we actually released, which is available on our website, a risk assessment guidance about foreign ownership, control and influence to guide industry on those types of risks.
So the Minister or the Department haven't exercised their powers even for the SONs, the systemically important critical infrastructure operators, when it comes to these apps?
No, because actually the direction powers in Section 32 of the Act are premised on an adverse security assessment. So the Department hasn't used directive powers, and they're the Minister's directive powers because that prerequisite has not been met. But the way that we tackle vendor risk is by requiring in the 13 classes of infrastructure assets to have a risk management program and mitigate supplier risk. One of the supplier risks relates to vendors.
Yes, but as you yourself said, specific action was required about these apps because of the extreme risk to the government. I think it would flow logically that the extreme risk also exists for critical infrastructure providers, given the public assessments that ASD and others have made about the intentions of foreign governments, including the Chinese government, to seek to establish a dormant presence on those networks for the purposes of future sabotage. We shouldn't make their task any easier by using software that they have control over. You're right, it was AGD that issued the PSPF direction about TikTok, and so it wasn't your responsibility at the time, and it would have been their responsibility to write to critical infrastructure, I guess. Given that you've now written to critical infrastructure operators about these two apps, will you consider writing to them about TikTok as well?
I believe, I'm just recalling, I had the function in 2023. I believe we had a discussion with infrastructure, but I'll consider writing to them formally.
When you say a discussion with infrastructure, you mean the Department of Infrastructure or infrastructure providers?
The department at that time managed critical infrastructure, including those entities regulated under the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, and I believe we did have a discussion at the time. I'll just refresh my memory, given it was 2 years ago.
I think there's something like 200 SONs. There would be probably, 3,000 critical infrastructure providers overall. How did you have a discussion with all of them simultaneously?
We do lots of town halls, and we have a trusted information sharing network, and that has a couple of thousand people. And the way in which I communicate en masse is actually with our Critical Infrastructure Advisory Council, which has a representative from each of those different sectors, and they cascade that information down in some ways. In other ways, I write to them.
Okay. Can I ask you just on notice to consider whether sufficient communication has been provided about the extreme cybersecurity risks of TikTok, and if you think it's not sufficient, that you address it?